and welcome. This is the Writer's Room podcast, a podcast for writers and people who are interested in writing. My name is Sandeep, and our guest for today is Mohini Gupta. Mohini is a writer, translator, and poet. She is a DPhil candidate at University of Oxford and has been the Charles Wallace India Trust Translator-Writer Fellow in 2017. Mohini has written on languages, literature, and translation for publications such as The Caravan Magazine, Huffington Post, and The Wire. Her English Hindi translations have been published by Tulika Publishers. Mohini, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sandeep. It's really exciting to be here.
Yeah, it's really exciting to finally do this. I remember about 3 years ago when we were at the Vedika Scholars Program, we would often have discussions on writing, on translations. We were also co-conducting a course together about writing, creative writing, critical writing. And, I've always wanted to share our discussions with people, and this podcast, in a way, is for aspiring writers. It is for writers who want to improve their craft. So just to kick off the conversation, maybe we can start talking about what your view of writing is. How do you view writing?
Sure. And thank you. I'm really looking forward to hearing all the episodes on this podcast. So thank you for doing this. Okay, talking about writing, I think for me personally, it helps me clarify my own thoughts. So whether it's a personal conversation or if it's, even a conversation with a friend or a tough conversation with someone in my life, from that to, academic writing or writing on literature, translation, or anything at all, I think I just can't think clearly unless I actually write it down. And the first thing I need to do is also handwrite it. I think that's a process that I've developed over the years, and it just there's something to that. There's something that happens in that process which just immediately helps me structure my thoughts, clarify my own thoughts. I come up with new ideas while I'm writing. I don't think I can come up with those ideas if I'm just thinking and talking. Actually, this podcast format probably isn't ideal for me in terms of coming up with new ideas, but if I was writing, it would just come more naturally and more clearly to me. So it has been a tool for my own thoughts, and just my tool for thinking clearly.
Yeah. I think we fall into that brand of old school writers who still need to write on paper, and I feel that there is some abstract connection between writing with your hand and thinking, right? Just to take that thought forward, like you've written in many platforms, written for many platforms and in many forms, right? So you've done poetry, you've done translations, you've done biographies, you've written features, right? So I wouldn't be wrong in saying that you're some sort of a powerhouse of writer. um, uh, so tell me, what does it take for someone, as young as you are, to put your thoughts out there? I'm sure at some point it would have seemed like a daunting exercise.
Definitely not a powerhouse, but I think multitasking is at the core of what I do. So I think all of this comes under my general multitasking, where I think I need to do more things to do them better in some sense. I think one kind of thing just doesn't give me the kind of motivation, or doing just one kind of thing doesn't give me the motivation to do something well. I think I need like many things happening at the same time. I think you've seen this. You've seen this about me at work. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it works for me. And poetry is something that's very close to me. It's something that I've been writing since I was, 3 or 4 years old. In fact, I found a little diary of mine from when I was 5 years old, where I wrote a little poem about my school teacher in English, and then I translated it into Hindi.
Hmm.
At that age. So I have no idea what was going on. But
Hmm.
I think poetry has been how I've always expressed my thoughts, my feelings. Yeah, whatever I have always thought of as sort of, yeah, deeper emotions and deeper thoughts. So
Hmm.
poetry is something that I really use to express myself in that sense. And apart from that, I think I've just been trying different things. So I am a literature student, and I've always been a reader of literature. So reviewing books or writing on writers, writing on literature comes very naturally in that sense. I'm sure it does to you as well. Translation is something, I guess, that originated at age 5, but it's something that I've been working on more consciously, at least since I was 15 or so. So that's when I did my first translation, the Vikram Seth poem that you've probably
Hmm.
heard me reciting, The Frog and the Nightingale, into Hindi. So this poem used to be in our 10th grade curriculum. And I fell in love with the poem and its rhyme, its musicality, and I decided that I want to recreate this process in another language, and that language for me was just Hindi. So I, for the first time, actually started writing in Hindi, or started rhyming in Hindi, started creatively working with Hindi, and I really enjoyed that process. And I think I found that through school, I wasn't able to engage with my language in that way. So this was my own way of engaging with Hindi. Yeah, just finding my own voice, I think, in a different language. I had always been taught to express in English, write in English. So that was the first time I was expressing in both languages. And I think I really enjoyed that process. So I've been chasing that feeling since then, and I've been doing different things in that field. So it started with poetry translation. It moved on to, you talked about Tulika books. So I started translating some children's books for them into Hindi. And I found that I really enjoy working in the children's literature space. It's just you can have a lot of fun with language. You can play around with language a lot, and I really liked that kind of freedom.
Hmm.
In fact, it's interesting because it's actually, I like working with rhyme, which actually is less freedom than in other kinds of writing, because I have to translate from rhyme into rhyme, and some might find that limiting, but I actually find that very freeing.
Hmm.
So I like that process. And then, of course, academic writing has gone on in parallel also, because I study literature. I went for a master's, and now I'm doing a PhD. So that's something that it may not come as naturally and spontaneously, but it's something that I've been working on. And a lot of the issues that come up for me, even during translation or in literature that I read, all of that comes into my academic writing, and I'm sort of trying to think, theoretically around those things. And maybe we can talk about that at some point later on. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I hope that gives you a sense of what
Yeah.
brought me to these different kinds of writing.
Yeah. So that does answer my question, and I have a follow-up question. You've talked about how you transitioned from translating poems to maybe you didn't talk as much about writing features for publications, but then transitioning into the academic sphere, right? Um, so and there are challenges that you faced along the way. So yeah, let's talk about some of the challenges that you faced in the academic sphere, because in many ways these uh, the vocabulary that's used in academia is limiting, right? And yeah, how did you deal with the limitations of the academic world?
That's a great question. um, I'm just thinking about it. So you were talking
Mm.
about the reviews and biography part of my writing also. I didn't talk about that too much because that's sort of something that's been happening over the last couple of years. So I think the longest feature piece that I've written for Caravan magazine was on the Hindi poet and novelist Vinod Kumar Shukla.
Hmm.
Uh, and I really enjoyed that because before that I had reviewed books or I had reviewed translations, but that was on a particular book that had just come out, and then I'd be asked to write a review, and then I would write that review. But this was the first time that I had to read everything by one author,
Hmm. Hmm.
interview them, as well as interview all the people sort of important people in their lives. And not just that, also people who'd been influenced, other young writers who've been influenced by him. So that was a very different kind of a process. And I really enjoyed that because I do enjoy talking to people. I enjoy working with people. So writing can be a pretty isolating exercise also.
Yeah.
Um, you
Yeah.
know.
Hmm.
So I think if you combine that with some of these things where I was getting to hear from people, creating connections with people. Unfortunately, when I was writing, the pandemic struck, so I couldn't actually go and meet the writer. I couldn't meet his family. I couldn't meet other people that I was interviewing, but I was still doing that virtually, and actually it was a great way to just keep myself sane also during that
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
crazy time. So I think that was a really great way of yeah, just expressing my love for literature and being able to really dig deep and go into the work of just one author. Um, Apart from Vinod Kumar Shukla, I think the other writer that I've been working on recently is Dorothy Banerjee. And we've just come out with a book called The Hindu Bard. It's published by a Welsh feminist publisher. And this book is basically a set of poems that were written by this Indian poet who ended up living in the UK and France in the early 1900s. So she wrote these poems around the First World War. She was a young student in Aberystwyth in Wales, and she has some really interesting poems on heartbreak or nature, or it's sort of in the romantic poetry style. My co-editor Andrew Whitehead and I discovered her work, and then there was a little notebook that she used to write these poems, and they've never been published and never been read
Hmm.
by the world before. So we've again sort of been digging up that story, talking to her niece, who is the only surviving descendant. She's about 90 now. So I went and spent time with her in Leicester. So I think that kind of process of working with people, um, and also getting to work on literature, reading someone's work, engaging with it deeply, I think all of those processes make it really interesting. And coming to academic writing, again, that's now very different. But
Yeah.
uh, I've again, my work has moved in a direction where again I'm trying to engage with people while I'm doing my academic writing also. So I started as a literature student. I moved on to doing culture studies, and now I have gone into some kind of a linguistic anthropology space where also, like I said, I like working with children's literature, and I also like working with children. I've been doing a lot of workshops over the years with on translation, on languages with young children in schools. So my PhD research is sort of engaging with that um, age group of students also. And again, we can talk about it later, but I think you asked about the limitations of academic writing, and I find that, I mean, there are many kinds of academic writing, but I think, at least as a literature student, the kind of academic writing we used to idolize and we used to respect was the very jargony sort of language. And
Hmm. Hmm.
to aspire to write like that. The denser you are in your writing, the more knowledgeable you are. I don't know, and I don't want to name names, but the theorists and writers that I'm talking
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and the toughest ones were always like, oh, this is the writer that we must aspire to understand and write like and do work like them. But I think I've just, recently I've realized that for me, it's about how clear you can be in your writing. So I
Hmm.
do my best to, even in my academic work, be as simple and lucid in my writing. Of course, there are some terms that you need to use, but I try to explain them as much as I can. And I think that's something that I aspire to as an academic writer, is to be very, very accessible.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, that's a personal goal that I have. I think I've moved on from trying to sound knowledgeable, and actually try to be knowledgeable and be able to convey that in the simplest of ways that I can.
That's really interesting. Okay, so a lot of things to unpack there.
Yeah.
Uh, I want to ask you more about how you conduct research and also about jargons in academic spheres, right? So let's talk about the first bit, right? So you talked about Vinod Kumar Shukla and Dorothy Banerjee, right?
Banerjee,
Uh,
because they
Banerjee,
switched to an English surname at some point. Yeah.
interesting, interesting. So the first person is from where is Vinod Kumar Shukla?
He's from central India, so he's from Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, that area. Yeah.
And the other person is from
So Dorothy Banerjee is from
UK.
so she was from this sort of Bengali upper caste sort of family who lived in UP. But at the age of 10, she and her family moved to London and then Wales and then London and then France. So she's lived all over. But yeah, she was again Indian, but yeah.
But she's from two worlds, so to speak,
yeah,
no?
yeah.
Okay. So clearly the challenges for research are unique here. And why I'm bringing this up is when you are doing biographies, when you're writing, when you're translating someone else's work, I think immersing yourself in that culture and understanding nuances become crucial to the work that you're trying to produce, right? So my question is related to the research. How does one, or how do you go about setting some goalposts for the research process? How do you know where to begin and where to end?
I haven't consciously thought about this, except in my PhD research, because that's a very different kind of research. But you're asking about the other research, right? Like the sort of more biographical kind of research that I've gone about.
You can talk about how you conduct research. I know that, for your PhD, you're doing surveys and really physically visiting schools and talking to teachers. But, maybe it's all a part of like the larger process of research. So you can talk about how you do research.
Okay, so I think initially it's just about figuring out what you want to say at the end of this piece. I mean, you may not know exactly what you want to say, but just a general direction that you want the piece to go in. And then I think my interviews are very sort of semi-structured interviews, because I think a lot comes out in an interview that you don't expect, and they just kind of take a direction that you're not expecting also sometimes. So like with Vinod Kumar Shukla ji, for example, I really just started by asking him some questions and seeing what comes out in our conversations. And then I took cues from that to say, okay, he talked about some of these things. Let me now talk to his publisher about how he viewed the same things. Let me talk to his family about how they viewed things. Let me talk to other, like his peers who have interacted with him he's been writing for about 60 years now. His first book published about 60 years ago. So there are peers of his who've seen him over the years, who started with him and been involved. So I started talking to the peers, and then different things would come out as I would talk to different people. And then through those, one thing would lead to another. And then I would be very happy, like I would be very flexible to kind of keep moving in whatever direction the things were taking me into. So I think, I guess the first thing is that I'm not very, very structured about things. I leave things a little bit open to, to take their own shape in some ways. So interviews and that kind of research has always been like that for me. And even in my PhD fieldwork, I mean, of course, there's a certain set of stakeholders that I need to speak to. So I need to speak to language teachers, for instance, or policymakers or students. But there are times where someone has suggested something and I've just gone with it. So I think being spontaneous is something that I kind of trust myself to be within that process, just to see where it goes. And yeah, I'm really just taking cues from what people are telling me. And yeah, I'm not sure what else happens.
Yeah. No. That makes a lot of sense, because you can't try to control the entire process of research, because then you would be closing a lot of doors that may have taken a life of its own, right? Like you said, when you go in with some preparation of you need to speak to these many people when you visit the hometown, but then you may find that there is another crucial individual who you also need to interview, and the set of questions that you may have framed for the family would be completely different from what you would speak to with with a friend or with a publisher of Vinod Kumar Shukla, right? So that,
and I also wanted to say that I started by saying that I think about the main thing that I want to say in my piece, but actually that doesn't help, because with my PhD, I started with a certain hypothesis. But when I
Yeah.
went out in the field and I attended classes and I spoke to teachers, I realized that I can't actually say what I set out to say anymore. I
Hmm.
was proven wrong at many points, which is a good thing also, because then you're, it's a good thing to be challenged in that sense. Sometimes it
Yeah.
can throw you off a little bit, but I think
Yeah.
if you're able to adapt to that and be able to take from the inputs you're getting and then at the end of it come up with something completely new, that's okay also. Even with the
Hmm.
Vinod Kumar Shukla piece, I didn't know what it would look like at the end of it. I
Hmm.
always tried to not read other pieces on him.
Hmm.
So I really try to do this where I know that I'll get influenced by the way people are writing, and all of those things. So I try to avoid some of that, just
Hmm.
to be able to, yeah, cut out the noise and get my own sort of thoughts in before I can, I don't know, get influenced by other people who've also written on similar things. That's not the case in academia. I think in academia you have to read everything that's been written on the issue and
Yeah.
then everything. So very different processes in that sense. But
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
I just want to say that it doesn't always go according to plan, and that's okay.
Hmm. I've experienced something similar. So I've been working on this story on Indian diaspora in the US. And initially, we started out by interviewing people who are living in the Indians who are living in the US. And it was going really well. We came out with an outline, and then I went and interviewed a professor who's studying the Indian diaspora, and that completely threw everything that we had done and up till that point out the window. So you never know what's going to come up, and what I mean. You always have to go in with a plan, but you can't let that plan dictate where your story is going to move, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
You learn it
awesome.
the hard way sometimes, but it's okay.
Yeah. It may double your time for research, but like, what's that saying? A stitch in time saves nine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's really cool that we agree on that. Let's talk about making writing more accessible and jargons. It's not just academia, all industries have this, uh, eh, especially the corporate space, right? Redundancies. um, how does one make the writing more accessible, right? It's more than just using a language that's commonplace. It's more than the form itself that you're using. By form, we can think of an email, can think of a memo or a short story, poem, whatever. uh, when we think of uh, reaching out to a larger audience, right? You talked about how you want to keep things simple and free of jargons, right? So maybe we can spend some time and talk about that. How does a writer be more approachable?
So I should say that the fact that this is my aspiration in writing, is something I had never thought about until our conversation. So I've never actually thought about this, but the more I say it, the more I realize how true it is for me, and how it's been something for me over many, many years. I've just been doing it subconsciously, but um, in terms of how you do it, I'm not sure how to talk about the process, but I think that first of all, I don't write a word for the sake of writing it, in the sense that it has to really add something to what I'm saying. So you can uh, so it's not like I'm constantly looking for the easiest version of the word, or I'm looking at the easiest synonym. It's not like that. But I think it's also about being clear about what I'm going to say first. So first really clarifying it in my own head, whether it's by scribbling things, or I even end up sort of using paper to like make bullet points, make charts, like move them around. So I'm doing a lot of that on the side to make sure that it's, the point is clear in my own head. There was somebody who had once told me that when you're reviewing your own writing or editing your own writing, like read through a paragraph and see if you can summarize every paragraph in one word or find one thought that you're dealing with in each paragraph. It may not work like that every time, but I think it's been helpful just to see that, okay, I'm dealing with only one thought in this one paragraph. I'm not mixing up too many things. So the point of that paragraph or the use of that paragraph is then clear. And then and there's sort of and every paragraph also sort of has a body, like an intro, body, and conclusion. Not very clearly, but yeah, like I'm looking for some kind of structure in each paragraph also. And again, this is not something you can achieve for every paragraph you write, but I think it's good to think about it when you're at least reviewing your work. And if it's academic writing, you're constantly reviewing your work, especially in a PhD thesis. I've already read the one chapter that I've written until now. I've read it like 20 times already and got friends to read it, including you. So I think yeah, so just going through your own writing and seeing if it's making sense as a reader really helps. I talked about sending it to you. I think feedback is just the most important part of writing. I think no writing can be done in isolation. Absolutely, like absolutely none. And if and I also send my writing to people who are not from my field. So you are broadly in the same field as me, but I would send it to other friends who are, say, in, I don't know, in law, who are working in the corporate world, who are just completely doing different things from what I'm in, not even in the academic space, actually. And I just want to see what they think of it. Like, do they think it's too much? I even send it to my family, and I ask them what they think, because, if sometimes I also, if I'm reading too much academic work, I also get used to that language, and sometimes I'll reproduce it. But I want people from outside academia to tell me if it's making sense, because I do want my writing to appeal to, I do want my academic writing to appeal to people beyond academia also. So yeah, I think feedback is another way of just keeping myself accountable and in check a lot of times. Yeah, I think these three things are the main things I can think of. One is just clarifying my own thoughts through this writing process. Actually, there are two things. Sorry, that was the first, and the second is this: just getting people from different fields to
Right.
your work and see what they think.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that the intention behind your work has to be really clear for it to uh, communicate clearly with the reader, right? The thing that you said about structure of a paragraph was really interesting, because I talk to my students about that all the time. And it's not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of training and discipline to be able to write uh, as clearly, because a paragraph has what, about 5 sentences at most, 5 to 6 sentences. If it's a if it's a really long paragraph, then there's something wrong with it, right? And that's a concept that's hard to grasp for new writers, right? Why do I have to follow this format? Writing is of many forms. um, uh, why are you trying to limit the way I write, templatizing things? So a lot of criticisms can be heard. But at the same time, I think the intention behind these exercises would be to avoid miscommunication in any form, right? And yeah, having a community of writers, like you can join a book club, you can share it with your friends and family. A lot of writers don't advise sharing your work with your family, because you're only going to get good feedback. But yeah, having a community is super important. And having what the industry people call beta readers, who's going to sort of give you an honest feedback, whether it's translating the way you want it to translate, right? um yeah,
I have
really.
a friend who says that She's a writer and translator also, and she says that if there's anyone in my life who only gives me good feedback, I just stop sending them anything. She actually gets angry. She's like, I completely judge them. If they say, oh, so nice and beautiful and nothing else, then I'm like completely judging them. So she's like very extreme about this. But I think family can be kind sometimes, but they can be critical also. So it's
Right,
you can set expectations. Yeah.
I'm on the other spectrum. I start having a long-winded discussion about why you didn't like it. How can I make it better so that you start liking it? Constant need for validation. But yeah, that makes sense. When you are sharing your work, you want an honest opinion, not just someone who's looking to please you. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Moving on, and now moving into the territory of your PhD work. Uh, can you tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you're doing right now in India and what your PhD is about?
Yeah, so I think I've given hints here and there, and created a great build-up for my research topic. But my academic inquiry has sort of always been around language and language politics. So my work in my master's thesis is, I think, where it started, where I started looking at language politics in India broadly, but more specifically around the youth, like the Indian urban youth, and the stereotypes that they have around different languages. So, what are the stereotypes they have about English speakers? What are the stereotypes they have about Hindi speakers? So that was my master's thesis. And then I started working on the phenomenon of English. So I moved into talking about hybrid languages, and I wrote a chapter in this book that came out. This book is called English Live. It's an edited volume on English. And my chapter was actually on reality TV in India and how language dynamics play a very crucial role in the sort of social dynamics on screen. And the two shows that I studied, interestingly, were MTV Roadies and Big Boss. So I really went into the heart of reality TV.
Masala TV.
Yeah, but I found there to be such fascinating language dynamics going on. Like, for instance, in Big Boss, the only two things that are banned in the house of Big Boss are physical violence and English. These are the only two rules. So actually that's where it started. I was like, oh, I didn't know this about Big Boss, and I started like talking to people who watch it, started attempting to watch a little, but I found it just yeah, there was a lot that was going on when it came to language, and so I tried to look at that for my work on English, and then because over the last years I was working in education, so when we both were working together, we were also working in higher education. Along with that, I started doing some workshops in schools. So I think it started with my time in Wales when I was there for a residency for 3 months. I just happened to interact with some students in schools, and that led to a whole series of workshops I started doing in schools in the UK, in India, and I realized that I really enjoy working in that space. And it got me thinking about how, one thing is to study the attitudes that we have around language now, but where do these attitudes get formed in the first place? So I decided to go back to primary education and look at how the education systems influence attitudes towards language. So that's really what my thesis is about right now, is looking at how students form their attitudes towards languages, especially their mother tongues. And the lens that I'm looking at everything through is language and shame. So I'm seeing if a sense of shame gets attached to your own mother tongue through the way it's taught to you in school or through the way the textbook is created. And ultimately also looking at the way that policy impacts all of these changes. So policy, textbooks, and teaching practices, and how these three things impact students and their relationships with their languages. So that's the topic that I'm looking at, and the way that I'm looking at it is through my field site is New Delhi. So I started with a very ambitious plan of studying different cities around India and different schools, and I realized that actually a PhD thesis is only it's only so many words, even though it's a lakh words. but you can't do so much. You have to sort of narrow. So my supervisors have pushed me to narrow the scope to just New Delhi. And so I've picked a sample of schools, private, government, English medium and Hindi medium schools. And I observed language teaching in these schools. I talked to language teachers in these schools. I've started talking to some students also to get a sense of their engagement with language, and some policymakers and textbook creators also. So those are the methods that I'm using, and I'm also analyzing policy documents and language textbooks for schools. So these are the three things that I'm doing, and yeah, hopefully
that's a lot. So is there anything that you can give us in terms of findings, or sneak peek maybe?
I am at the end of my data collection now, and I'm starting the writing phase. So the findings are now going to sort of take some shape. They haven't, the data hasn't taken any shape yet. It's just all there, and I have to kind of make sense of it. But I think at least the part that I have finished is analyzing documents, so like textbook analysis. And I think that's the chapter that I've written and I shared with you also. But in terms of textbooks, I was trying to look at Hindi textbooks in particular, and how are there themes and the content that's selected for Hindi textbooks, is it at all relatable or engaging for young students to read, and what kind of an association to the language does it form for them? So I realized that when I compared Hindi and English textbooks, for example, Hindi textbooks have a lot of chapters on, say, morality or ethics. There's a lot on patriotism, unity and diversity in the country. There's also a lot of old classical Hindi texts, which will, and like disproportionately large amount of these texts, which would create a huge distance between the student today and what they're reading. So I just found that there were very few things that they would be able to relate to. And I did sort of an analysis of these textbooks, classes 5 to 8 other textbooks that I looked at. And yeah, whether it was the accessibility of the textbook in terms of what kind of Hindi it uses, so one is classical and old Hindi, but even in the sort of chapters that you find normally in the textbooks, the language is very, very, how do I say this? It's just difficult language, and it's not age appropriate language. So if you're looking at a class 7 textbook, the level of the Hindi that's in the textbook is way higher than the student would be reading it. So I know these kind of analysis. I also spoke to teachers who gave me some insights into these, and teachers also felt that about the textbooks. In fact, they felt that textbooks were being written by professors who work in higher education and are not aware of what's happening in schools or how students are responding to these textbooks. So there was some this was there. I'm quoting them at this point. But so these are some of the conversations that I was having with teachers, and these are some of the issues that I was looking at, say, in textbooks, is how engaging or how relatable is it to students at that age. And the contrast that I've created, and I didn't talk about this in my research topic, but I am also looking at Wales as a counterpoint to Hindi language education. I'm looking at Welsh language education also. I'll just give you a small example, and then we can move on. But for example, in Welsh language textbooks, I looked at the same level of language textbooks in Wales, and I found that the themes and issues that they covered were things like birthday parties, or pets, or family outings, or snow, or Christmas. And there are things that children would be familiar with, so things that are from their daily surroundings. And they were basically using things that already exist around children to then teach them the language, and say, okay, you know these things, here's how you can articulate how to speak about them or whatever. And Hindi, I found that there was it seems like an attempt to teach more than just the language. It's not just teaching the language, but there's this sense of, okay, it's not about it. Sure, there are a few familiar things, but there is there's more of a messaging around it. There's this sense of like the nation that needs to be conveyed through the Hindi text. Or there is a sense of, like I was saying, morality or good behavior amongst children. So poems around you must be obedient to your parents or your teachers. And there are some of these kinds of things which I feel ultimately distance the students from their text, because they'll feel like this is a language where, I don't know, that there's a lot of preachiness around these issues, and you don't want to associate with that, and then you just keep going further and further away, and it just creates a negative image for you around that language as a whole. Yeah, I don't know if this makes sense, but there's a lot of complications here also, because I'm looking at Hindi, which is also in a very complicated position in the country
politically.
right now. Politically. So there's also that dual position where it's very dominant politically, but socially and economically, it still loses out to English in many ways. So yeah, just language, politics, and dynamics are so complicated.
Yeah. I can only imagine. And it's very interesting you pointed out the grade level of students and the kind of texts that they're expected to read. I'm reminded of the Asar report by Pratham and their findings that an average grade level student would not be able to read a grade 5 text. And turns out it's similar for language textbooks as well. So okay, our schools and students are in a dire situation.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's just very difficult to generalize anything here, because it was so different in private schools, things were so different in government schools. So again, there's a lot of nuance that I'm not getting into, but it's a tough space to
I'll tell you what, I remember when I had to switch schools. I went from a state board, Nagaland state board, to a ICSE board, and at that time neither me nor my parents realized how big of a switch this was going to be. And now I can empathize with students who study maybe in a Hindi medium, and then suddenly they are in an English medium college where they are where all of their textbooks are in English. Because I was not even in a different medium. I was studying in English medium in Nagaland and in Assam, but just the level of depth, level of critical introspection that's required to answer questions in an exam are just very far apart, right? And cognitively, that's a huge leap to take for a student.
No, that's exactly what the debates around, say, the new education policy in 2020 and its focus on mother tongue education. So, on one hand, in my research, I'm talking about the benefits of mother tongue education. But at the same time, I also realized that when you put out a policy like that, then, sure, there'll be, you create more mother tongue education for people, but then there'll always be, say, an elite group that's always going to go to those English medium schools, and that divide then just becomes greater and greater, because you're not preparing them to then compete, and especially at the higher education level, like you were saying, that has to be in English, just given the kind of multilingualism in the nation,
right.
and how many students from different states come into colleges. So technical education, all of these things will be available in English, and so to have them lose out on that, and English somehow is not just about the language here, right? It's about confidence. It's almost people feeling like, people are smarter or more intelligent if they speak English. So it almost becomes a thing about intelligence or social status or cultural capital, and
eventually a mode of earning as well, right?
Economically it translates also.
Directly it's going to translate into whether you're going to get what sort of job you're going to get eventually. Because communication, when we say communication, we mostly mean communication in English.
Exactly.
It's a really complicated space.
It is. And we can go on and on about it, but there's a lot to say.
Yes.
And I think, just to sum up my interest in this topic also, like I was talking about Hindi textbooks and the kind of content that's in the textbooks right now. I think my translation work is also an attempt to kind of fill that gap. Obviously, I'm only translating a little bit, but the way I translate into Hindi is into a very, very colloquial kind of a Hindi. So when I translated Frog and the Nightingale into Hindi, there are some points where I've consciously used English words, or I've just used words that would be more natural to hear for a child of that age who's reading that poem. And I think I'm also constantly trying to create more material, which is why I also translate into Hindi as opposed to. So if you meet most translators who are working in the field, they're translating Hindi, whatever language from literature from their languages into English. But I work in the other direction. So I work from English into Hindi. And I think my motivation is to really have a set of poems or stories available for children in a kind of Hindi or in a kind of language that's accessible to them. And that's actually what my platform, Mother Tongue Twisters, is also trying to do, is to create this archive of poems, mostly poems actually, in like different languages. Of course, Hindi is the only one that I can speak, but I have friends like you who speak so many languages, and I'm trying to get people to add to this archive and just create a set of things, set of poems for children in sort of accessible ways in their languages. Yeah.
I'm going to tag Mother Tongue Twisters in the description for the podcast. Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. So we talked about a lot of things pertaining to the world of writing, education, and language. Maybe we can try and sort of wrap things up in a way. So okay, let's do this. We've talked about different industries and different forms of writing that these industries require you to engage in. But let's forget these structures right now and just think of the act of writing and sitting down and putting words to paper. And that's how we all begin, right? And like you talked about it, you were all of 5 to 7 years old when you translated your first poem. And it's about that, preserving that feeling, that special place that writing holds for you. And as we grow up, we tend to forget that, and we try to turn this feeling into a profession, into an obligation and whatnot, and then suddenly it becomes a mammoth of a challenge, right? And coming back to your idea of keeping things simple and accessible, maybe you can just wrap up this conversation by saying how you've been able to do that so far.
I'm just thinking about how to sum this up, but I think you're right, and I think we do tend to forget that special relationship we have with writing. And I hadn't thought about this poem that I wrote as a 4-year-old in my little notebook. And in fact, I think when I was 8, I attempted to write a novel. I don't know where it is now, but it was an entire children's novel that I wrote at that time. So there was a different kind of discipline that I clearly had then, which I need now. But I think you're right, that it's very easy to forget that special relationship, especially if it's something that it becomes something that you have to do and deliver, on a deadline and things like that. Yeah, so I think that I've also had a complicated relationship with my own writing over the years. And I think, there are phases where I just don't want to write anything, and I'm like running away from that process a lot. But again, there are times where, there are no options also, especially when there are deadlines to meet. And you just have to kind of sit and stare at your laptop until something comes out. But I think going back to what I was saying, going back to things like writing with my hand, for instance, I found that that's a process that's really helped when I'm struggling, and just clarifying what's in my own head about what I want to say, structuring some things, just scribbling around and making sense of the thoughts in my head. I think all of those things, again, going back to writing as your tool for thinking and all of those things, I think finding your own ways to come in contact with that is a great way to start. And just being able to, and I think, like you were saying at one point, it's not always the first thing you write. In fact, I have almost always trashed the first thing that I've written. And I was talking about the one chapter that I've written for my thesis right now. I had to submit it at, on a particular date, and 2 days before that, I had a completely different draft, and I wasn't.
Hmm.
And within 24 hours, I rewrote 15,000 words. I have no idea how this
Whew.
happened, but
Hmm.
I think the sometimes I just write
Hmm.
nonsense, like
Hmm.
I just, it may not make sense. You have to just not judge yourself at some point and just write, because there's a block sometimes and you just want to get rid of that, and you just write down words on paper, and they may start making sense at some point. You can go back and change everything, after you're done just scribbling or typing something. um, it's very difficult to develop that discipline of just writing every day. And in
Hmm.
fact, now that I'm entering my writing phase, I need to also keep listening to this podcast and remind myself how to do this. But yeah, I think it really is, like you said, about the intention behind your writing and going back to how you can articulate that intention in different ways. So find
Hmm.
a way of doing it basically before you start typing it all out.
Yeah, excellent. And it's like you said, it's very important for us to remember that it's not just another job, right? If it was, you wouldn't be going through this difficult experience of trying to figure out exactly which word is going to fit here. You could do anything else. Why write? Right? So yeah, there would be, everybody has some reason why they started and why they're continuing, and that's exactly what will help them through this process.
True. Thank you
Yeah,
for doing this.
yeah. This was really cool, Mohini. And before we end, did you bring your one interesting thing for our listeners?
Yes, I have thought about recommending a translation. This is a translated book called Ghachar Ghochar. It's a translation from Kannada. The original is by Vivek Shanbag, and the translation is by Srinath Perur. I think it's one of those books that came out as a bit of a standout book in the translation world, because it really changed the way you think about translation. And when you're reading the book, it reads very effortlessly and seamlessly in English, but you're also very aware that it's a translation. In fact, the title itself, Ghachar Ghochar,
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense until you
Yeah,
read the uh,
nonsensical words. Yeah,
yeah.
right. Hmm.
But it just, you end up reading the book and you realize you take so much away, also from the original language through this translation.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it
yeah,
really transformed the way translators are also thinking about the process of translation.
yeah,
And it's also just a wonderful story. So
yeah.
it's a very easy read, and it's really a fun read. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think Kachar Gochar is a good way to start.
It's an excellent book, and I think this is the first like translated work that I read, and I just couldn't put it down. It's so interesting. It's almost like there is no gap between the writer and the written work. It's just flowing into the reader, right? But I want to share an interesting anecdote. So I was at this conference at Ashoka University where both the translator and the author were talking about how they completed this work, and Vivek Shanbag was talking about his conversations with Srinath Perur, right? I think he is a poetry faculty member at Columbia University, and they were talking about how they had to add a chapter to the English version. So the English version is different from the Kannada version of the novel, if I'm not wrong. And another interesting question that was asked to Vivek, they asked him, there was this really interesting scene about this person walking down the staircase, and that made me feel, so many things. How did you come up with that scene? And Vivek, he says that, see, I'm not a writer. I'm an engineer who writes. So I'm not thinking when I'm writing. I'm just putting words down as they come to me. Right?
Interesting.
And that's crucial because it's exactly how the book reads. There
Hmm.
is there is
Right. Yeah.
no, yeah, like I said, there are no filters there. There are
Mhm.
no there's no intentionality as such as how you're supposed to feel. You
Yeah.
feel as the story makes you feel. And yeah, I think it's a brilliant recommendation. Like everybody should at least take a look at it if they don't read.
No, I'm glad. I didn't know there was an added bit in English. So thank you for telling me that. And I think that's an advantage or a liberty you can take when the author's around and the translator can actually work closely with the author. Some authors are not okay with that also, but the fact that Vivek Shanba was, that's great, and I guess it led to a kind of transcreation that we end up reading in the book.
Yeah.
So that's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, my recommendation is this book that I'm reading, and it's not related to writing, but it's called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And although this is a book about how you handle money and your mindset related to your finances, I think there's a lot more to learn from this book, and it's been a really interesting read so far. It's a short book, about 250 odd pages or so, and yeah, people should check it out.
That's interesting. I didn't know about this. I'll pick it up also.
Yes. Okay, Mohini, thank you so much for doing this. And, I'm sure that our listeners would really appreciate your insights on writing, your experience with writing, and how you've transformed as a writer over these years.
I hope so. But thank you so much, Sandeep. I really, really enjoyed this. And I think it was the perfect way to begin my writing journey in the PhD process. So this really helps. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.